In Service to Love, the relationship podcast that helps you create more love in the practical day-to-day, centering connection in the life of the modern family with your host, therapist, mother, and artist, Randé Dorn. Hello and welcome. My name is Randé Dorn, and this is the In Service to Love podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Today, special topic, they all are, I guess. But today I wanted to talk about multicultural, multiracial relationships. It is something that I specialize in my work as a therapist. And why do I specialize in it? Why is it so important to me? Because it is my own background, right? If you listen to some of the other podcasts, you know that I was in a multicultural, multiracial relationship with my ex-husband for 20 years. We have 2 children who are now multicultural, mixed race. I identify, if you don't know, as a Black woman. And, even as I say that, I know I don't often maybe look or come off that way. I will share that lately, when I've been out kind of in the dating scene, people are now asking me if I am Puerto Rican, if I'm Latina, which I am not. But it's and someone asked me that when I lived in New York for a while. For like about a year, I got a lot of that, and maybe it makes more sense when I was living there. When I was growing up, they definitely, I think many people knew or assumed that I was mixed race. And so I'd get that question of, what are you? Um, which, I think when I talk about kids in this particular podcast around this issue, that it's a really jarring and uncomfortable question. I think specifically when it's posed like that, right? Like, what are you? As if, like there's some mystery that needs to be solved, or you're just some kind of exotic animal or creature. I don't know. It was a really jarring question to be asked as a child. And at the same time, I understand people's curiosity. So when I say I identify as a Black woman, female, how I describe myself now is that, yes, in lineage wise, I come from 2 parents who also identify as Black. But what I also say is that they all look like me. Everyone in my family, cousins, siblings, they all look like me. My family, my mom's side originated from New Orleans. And so, there's a bit of that mixing of cultures and race through generations, but not necessarily in the generations closest to me. So that's why that gives you a little bit of my own background. And then the father of my kids, his background is that his dad is Mexican and his mom is white. So he is within him also multicultural, multiracial, and therefore our children are a blend of all of those things. So I like working with, and I think I have a lot of information around trying to blend a family, trying to create a family, trying to uh, create a partnership that is blending all of these really rich experiences. And when as I go through some of these points, there's 5 of them today, with a lot of juiciness within each point. I really like to think of all of us are really in multicultural relationships, even if they may not be multiracial or ethnic relationships, because all of us are coming from a blend of diversity that is going to inform and impact, right, our intimate relationships, how we coexist, how we create um, intimacy and family and a home life, right, and lifestyles. So let me then, as I say that, let me just go to point number one in this, and maybe why am I talking about this today? Um, I think as I continue to work with families and couples who some of this is coming up for them. I also typically uh, attract clients who are coming from who identify as mixed race or multicultural, and who are trying to kind of impact and not impact unpack what that experience might be for them. I think having continuing to have these discussions can be so just allowing for people to be seen, in the complexities of all of this. And like I said, I think my other point is to help all of us to see the diversity within our relationships, and therefore, give a window or a way to appreciate each other more, better, with more ease within our relationship. So the first one point that I think I already started was to think of culture broadly. To think of when I see myself as even as a Black female, it's like, but culturally, what does that mean? What does it mean to be identified as a female, as a woman? What does it mean to have grown up in Los Angeles, to have grown up in the South Bay part of Los Angeles, growing up in Gardena? What does it mean in terms of my background economically, in terms of your religion, in terms of home life, even maybe where you line up in the birth order. Were you an only child? Was your partner an only child? Are they one of six or one of three? Were they the oldest or the youngest or somewhere in between? Middle class, upper class, wealthy? Did they come from what they would consider poor or poverty circumstances? That within even their race, is someone who's identifying as Black. Black is in the U.S. As in, I was dating someone most recently who was Black, but is also coming from a more Caribbean descent, but grew up in London, right? And that's a very different type of diversity, right? That I can't necessarily make assumptions around their particular background, or even maybe sometimes even align their background with the experience of someone who maybe is as a Black male growing up in Los Angeles, right? Or even in, Northern California. You want to think about what's the placement within your family or your partner's family? What are the responsibilities of that placement? And there are absolutely responsibilities that come from different cultures, right? Being the oldest son or being the oldest daughter has meaning in a variety of cultures, and meaning in relationship to the family of origin, in relationship to the in-laws and the dynamics that may come from that. Obviously, different cultural backgrounds view family differently. What are the values around partnership? What are the values around gender? What are the values around money, around wealth, around what our goals are as a couple, what our goals are our goals to create children, are our goals to support just us or our immediate family or our community? What are the values and goals around particular religious practices that you or your partner might be coming from. What else like looking at my notes? What else did I write down? Also kind of rules, right? Cultural rules within the home, outside of the home, stay at home, working, providing, what some of those things might look like. Um, the other thing I wrote were cultural norms or expectations. Again, what are the expectations that each of you are bringing to the relationship? I'm assuming this if we're dating. I'm assuming this in these roles if we are partnered up or if we're getting married. I may even be assuming marriage if we are dating for a particular length of time, or if I'm a particular age. I may be, what are the conversations around children? How many? Or is there a limit? Is there not a limit? Again, what are the cultural expectations and norms? And then to think about, what are the stereotypes that I might be bringing to the table about myself, my own culture, and also the stereotypes that I might be bringing to the table, or that are running in the back of my mind around someone that I'm attracted to, or around my partner or partnership. I mean, I know I said a lot, but I think where sometimes we get tripped up is that we can see each other from such a very narrow lens, right? Going back to myself as a Black woman, um, I think, there are the tropes and the stereotypes, right, of being, I don't know, very strong, or, like being able to strong meaning being able to carry a heavy load, or maybe being very warm or nurturing, or even being very religious, right? Or coming from a Christian background, or being very skeptical, or that there are, I mean, even ask yourself, it's like, what do you think of when you think of a Black woman? What do you think of when you think about being in an intimate relationship with a Black woman? What do you think about when you think about a Black woman maybe being a part of your family, not just in partnership, but now I've got this new sister-in-law, or this aunt, or this step parent? What comes to mind? And then we can diversify that, right? If with someone who is, a Filipino male, or someone who is Southeast Asian, or right, there's the beauty is that there's so much diversity in this world. And yet with that diversity comes a lot of questions, right? And it's like when as I'm writing all this stuff down, I'm thinking one of my questions to you is to think about your culture, right? Think about what is important to you, and then think about what is kind of what a deal breaker, like what do you need to stay? What is the legacy within your culture that you want to pass down, or for you to kind of hold on to within partnership? And what are you willing to compromise on? I mean, when we diversify in this way and decide to choose to be in relationship with someone who may be coming from a very different background, values are important. I talk about this often. And so even though you may be in relationship with someone who may seem to have a lot of differences or diversity in relationship to you, you still want to find some common core values between the two of you. But as you're trying to negotiate this diversity within your home life, lifestyle, within your relationship, you do have to ask yourself, it's like, all right, what am I willing to compromise on, potentially give up? What am I willing to celebrate? And what am I willing and need to hold on to? right? When I think about, let's say, even culturally, cooking or food, I'm not much of a I can cook things. I wanna own that. I keep saying, like, "Oh, I'm not much of a cook." It's not true. Like, I fed my kids, but culturally, I think of, like, my mom and even more so, like, my aunt as one of um, these women that really held on to, um, cultural cuisine within our family. And so, for me, introducing those things to my kids was important to me. But I introduced it by, picking up some food from my aunt's house, or or visiting my aunt on those special occasions where, I knew she was going to be cooking, right? And then I could share that. But at the same time, in our household, not that we ate a bunch of like Mexican food, uh, but we did, and I think the cuisine in that respect um was probably more in line with what my ex-husband was maybe more comfortable with. Also because he actually didn't really care for the food that was coming from my background. And so that was one of those things that I was, not so hard pressed to keep around. But as I've shared before, like religion continues to be very important to me. That was one of those things that was necessary for me to keep around, and that he was willing to compromise on, in the sense that when we decided to get married and raise children, I was very adamant that that was going to be a part of how I was going to raise any children that we had. And I needed his agreement before I would agree to move forward in a long term relationship with him. I think, in terms of how you celebrate, what are your rituals, what are your traditions, that all of those can be on the chopping block. All of those can also be things that we elevate and celebrate, that you can do that within your partnership, within your family dynamic. But first, that first question, in terms of thinking of culture broadly, I'm throwing all this stuff at you so that you have permission, right, to kind of like open up this flower a little bit more, thinking of yourself and your partnership and your partner from this image of like this kind of unfolding, blooming partner, and to see them in all the elegance of what they bring to the table, and how do we just kind of like nourish ourselves with the beauty of what each of us can be bringing to family and to partnership. And so knowing, it's like thinking about all the ways that we can show up um, within that, and then asking ourselves, what do I really want to hold on to? What do I really want to add to this pot, to this soup? And what might clash in a way that I can leave out. And I mean, even as I'm saying it that way, it's a really important questions as you decide whether or not um, a diverse partnership is right for you. And so, with that in mind, the second thing that I want to add to that is this idea of staying curious, right? Asking the questions, asking more, and why, and what is the meaning behind that, and why are you making these particular choices or decisions? Why do you do things in this particular way? Why do you eat these things in these particular ways? What's the meaning behind these rituals? Use these as the idea of being curious again as an opportunity of deepening your relationship and understanding of another person. And this idea of being curious is really being pushed around a lot, in mass culture. And I think it's such a beautiful way to approach anything. And sometimes we uh, we allow ourselves to be so much more curious about the world around us, the world outside of our door, and less curious about everything that's inside our home. That we like to make assumptions. We like to sometimes even compartmentalize the people that we profess to love and care about and be attracted to. The other thing I wrote around staying curious, it's so that we don't dismiss or dismantle our partner. And when I say that, the other thing that I want to say is that whiteness is a culture. And I want to say that out loud because in some ways whiteness can be so obviously pervasive and sometimes oppressive. And for many of us who are coming from a non-white background, we can again make assumptions. Well, I live in whiteness all the time, so I'm going to make these potential assumptions about you if I'm in partnership with someone who identifies as white. And I really encourage you to not do that. That within a human being who also identifies as white, they do deserve the same level of curiosity around family, around expectations, around religion and money. And there's obviously even ethnicity within quote unquote whiteness, within their family of origin, within their placement within their family. And obviously the opposite, that, as someone again who identifies as not only as a Black female, but a person of color, woman of color, that there can obviously be stereotypes and assumptions made um, about us, about me, um, and that when we are sometimes in relationship with someone who identifies as white or who has a certain amount of privilege in the world, that what is also required is a level of curiosity again around your partner's experience. Many of us don't necessarily have shared, all of our experiences aren't shared. And so what I find as I'm saying that, so let me be notched down and be a little bit more specific, is that the experience of oppression, the experience of racism, the experience of many things that are quite harsh and traumatizing to those who are identified within minority cultures or ethnicities and races that have experienced horrible things or the legacy of horrible things. Curiosity is still required in relationship to someone who is coming from that background. We all deserve curiosity and to be witnessed. And I think sometimes when people are coming together from diverse backgrounds and diverse races, or maybe more specifically, someone who is white, with someone who is um, multicultural or Black or Latinx, that we can sometimes make assumptions, one, and two, we may want to avoid having those conversations because they're uncomfortable, because we bristle around um, ownership or responsibility of a legacy that maybe, we can claim we didn't participate in. And, at the same time, obviously, there is a legacy of privilege whether you participated or not. And so I'm saying this to again in cure to encourage you to be curious, to have those conversations. I'm always encouraging uncomfortable conversations because why not? Right? I mean, if this is someone that you're attracted to and you're considering falling in love with, and really considering is what we do I want to fall in love with this person? Do I want to put myself in proximity to someone that I might, over time fall in love with, and then therefore decide whether I want to marry or have children with, and everything that comes with all of that? Why wouldn't you want to understand them? Why wouldn't you want to understand some of the pain that they might be experiencing in the world and some of the triumphs as well, right? As someone who is a Black female who is also light skinned in color, there is a level of privilege, right? Who has, a lot of education, who can articulate herself in the world, at least in the English language, that, I get to move about the world in a way that not everyone has access to. And for someone to be it's meaningful for someone to be curious about that, right? And to be able to be seen um in that particular way, or within that the diversity of that experience, right? That, is often said, you know Black people aren't a monolith. And my experience of my own Blackness is still unique to me. And part of that uniqueness is, one, how I look, how I've been identified in the world by others. And as I'm identified by my appearance or by my speech, things are assumed about me. And I'm allowed to move in certain circles because of that. And I'm probably not allowed to move in certain circles about that. And whoever I'm partnered with, whoever you're with, also deserves to have the opportunity to share themselves with you, right? They deserve the opportunity to unpack some of these questions, right? To be fully seen. That's what we all want. And so this is just I'm sharing some of these as an opportunity to say, tell me more about XYZ, right? And these are also opportunities to love your partner more, to love your partner more deeply, right? The more we get to know each other, there's more to fall in love with, right? So staying curious about all the things, not just um, one's culture, one's background, but how those things influence them, influence their choices, influence their value. As you think about yourself, and part of this is knowing, like, again, like, who am I, and what would be a good fit for that version of me that I'm always kind of striving for. Who would be a great fit for that? Because the third point is to ask yourself, why are you attracted to someone that is potentially so different from you? And, the thing that opposites attract is a thing. It's so true. And it's true usually because on a deeper, maybe even subconscious level, is that when we talk about fit and we talk about opposites attracts, is that we're usually attracted to the ways of being, or maybe even some of the values that we want, but we weren't able to necessarily cultivate within our own background or home. So, maybe, attracted to someone who is a little more type A, or someone who's a little more, let's say, kind of rigid or organized in a particular way. And it's because, maybe you grew up in a household or a culture that was a little bit more loose or flamboyant or chaotic. And so it's like, ooh, if I'm in proximity to type A, organized, got their stuff together, then maybe some of that can rub off on me, and that can add to and balance me out. We can think about, again, going to this idea sometimes of whiteness being something that might be considered bland, or beige in a particular way. Hopefully I'm not overly offensive by saying that. And so then I'm, maybe attracted to someone who, again, culturally, that it's like they're really invested, and it's really rich, and they're coming from like a deep rooted legacy where maybe culturally, they are like all up in it, in the food, in the dance, in the music, in the movement, maybe creatively, artistically, they're all about that. And so it's like, wow, that sounds and seems so exciting, right? To want to be a part of something that feels dense and it feels rich. If I grew up in a culture that seemed kind of surface level in a particular way. So let me get some of that, right? And so asking yourself, as you consider, as you're already in a culturally diverse partnership, relationship, or family, why was I attracted to someone that was so different from me? And as you think about that, and as I mentioned some of these things right before, it's like, what were the benefits? What are the benefits, right? How do I love what has been added to my life by choosing someone who brings some newness, some diversity to my life? And then to think, what am I also pushing up against? So what comes to me is, I love the fact that that my ex-partner spoke, different several languages, not several, but three languages in total, because I'm terrible. I have tried, and I will probably maybe one day continue to try, but I'm terrible at languages. I have a mental block. I freeze. It is really um embarrassing and scary. There's just a lot of stuff that comes up for me. So I find someone who speaks more than one language so appealing. And as you can tell, I'm a super talkative person. And so not being able to talk to other people who don't speak English or don't speak English well is it's it's hard. It's hard because I really do love connecting with people. I love connecting uh, with a lot of different people. And so having a language barrier um, is hard for me. Um, to not be able to connect in that way. And so finding someone who adds that to the the wealth of the partnership is really quite appealing to me. And when I say push up against, at the same time, it's like, well, I'm also, was with someone where, we'd go visit family, and then they would all speak in Spanish, which left me out a lot of the time. So maybe that's something where it's like, well, here's a moment where I'm not able to you know, appreciate the diversity that I also ask for in some ways. Or maybe, again, culturally, maybe being around family or having family centered in a particular way in his culture was a little bit different than how family was centered in my family. And so sometimes it's like, oh, I wish I was, instead of maybe just kind of spending a lot of time with family, like maybe seeing cultural sites when we were traveling. But, right, someone's benefit might be, something that they push up against. So that's one of the things that I was like, oh, that there were days I maybe pushed up against that particular value within within his culture. And yet I was with him because there were all these other benefits, right, that came, including his relationship to family and the values of what family meant within a partnership, right? How he showed up in the marriage was, in a lot of ways, very cultural and was very positive to me. So, right, that was a benefit as well. So thinking about, why am I attracted to someone who's so different from me? What am I getting from that? What are the benefits? What do I love about that? And where are the places that I might be bristling or pushing up against? Again, what comes to mind is in many uh, cultural communities, for instance, like I said, family, but also in laws, that there may be the a sense of community, or even kind of group dynamics, or more kind of like a porous structure. So it's like, well, everybody knows everything, or everyone's involved in a lot of things, where, maybe even culturally in the US, or, this kind of individualized society that we live in, that, it's kind of like the partnership and sometimes the nuclear family, and that's it, right? And so, there can be tension around how the extended family is viewed and appreciated, in these more kind of like diverse setups, for instance. And again, to think, well, if I'm choosing someone who doesn't share that particular value around the extended family, am I again getting so many benefits that I love, that I am willing to, going back to that compromise around, just being more open or available to a broader sense of a family, a broader definition, or sense of family or community, and how we as a partnership interact with that. So, what do you appreciate, and how do you feel with this partner? I I want you to consider that, the things about culture, and in some ways why we might be attracted to someone who might be the opposite of us, or again bringing a level of diversity um, to our life, is that there's there's a feeling that we get from that person. There's a holding, or maybe there's a warmth, or maybe there is a witnessing in a way, because I don't know you, because I didn't grow up with you, someone like you, and the idea of you, that I'm in some ways maybe able to see you more clearly, that I am able to ask those questions from that place of interest and curiosity, because you're so different from me. I can't make assumptions on a certain level. And so maybe what you might be getting, at least initially, from a relationship with someone who's coming from a different or opposite background, is that your edges become way more clear. That because you're now in opposition to someone, that, right, the othering, there is now an other, there isn't a we or a collective us, that I now get to stand out in relationship to you, and you get to stand out in relationship to me. And now I get to maybe feel or be able to like define my edges. If I'm pushing up against your family background, I'm in doing so, I'm saying, well, but these are my rituals, or now I'm realizing culturally this is what I eat, or I realize, I get up early because of this particular reason, and I may not have so clearly been able to see myself if I wasn't pushing up against something that was causing me, to want to defend who I am, where I came from, what my background is, what I stand for. So there can also be, in some ways, a benefit in this diversity because I get to be seen, and I get to be different in relationship to you. So we get to be curious about them, and we get to be curious about ourselves. The other thing, maybe the darker side that I want you to think about when you're asking yourself, well, why am I attracted to someone different? Is there parts of you that are attracted to someone different because there are parts of you that are not attracted to your own culture, to your own background? I mean, I'll simplify it even in the sense of, if I'm coming from a background where money was scarce or difficult, where, maybe, yeah, there's just a level of poverty in my background. And so I'm looking for someone who grew up with wealth. I'm looking for someone where money is constant, stable, and, never ending. That is a cultural difference. And then once I'm with someone potentially who is wealthy and I'm coming from, maybe a position where of poverty, well, then I'm mad at them for growing up wealthy. And then I'm angry at them, for living a particular life of privilege or not noticing maybe how other people are experiencing life outside of their wealth. Or the opposite, right? I'm interested in someone who, maybe because of growing up in poverty, that they found value in things outside of money. So, they have this rich life that didn't necessarily need money to create that richness. Maybe family became more important, or things that they did, ways that they found to just kind of be expansive and joyful and stretch. And so I was like, wow, that's amazing. I want someone like that. But then I get mad at them because they're not performing in maybe a particularly wealthy or rigid way. So it's like I love them for their freedom maybe, and now I'm bothered by it. I love them for their privilege of wealth, but now I'm bothered by it. To think about, like, when I'm attracted to someone who is so different from me, is there a part of me I'm trying to cut myself off from? Is there a part of my background? Is there a part of my culture? Is there a part of my race? Is there a part of my economics? Is there a part of my values or home life? Right? Again, someone who's maybe coming from a very religious background who's like, "Oh yeah, I want to be with someone who's non-religious or who is an atheist or whose, religion is just so very, very different from mine." And it's because I don't want to be a part of the religion I grew up with or that was in my own home. And even as I say all this, these choices are all okay. And when we are maybe specifically moving away from something because we don't desire it, because we are ashamed of it, because we, are like, "Ugh, I'm trying to find, I'm trying to find a word for it because at the same time, I am talking about someone's culture. I am talking about someone's background, and so if there's parts of yourself that you're trying to deny and you hope to cover it up by being in a relationship to someone that you can exalt because they're so different from you, and being in relationship to that difference may help you to move away from or deny the parts of yourself that you are ashamed of. I ask you to look at that. And it is a lifelong process, right? Again, sometimes these things don't come to light until we're in relationship to someone who helps us to define our edges. And even as I say this, you know, I continue to have to reckon, right, with how I want to show up in the world, especially as I'm working with clients, as I'm doing this podcast. Um, from a very vulnerable place, I I didn't date black men for, well, forever, right? Until recently, now that you know that, maybe until the really last year. And in some ways, I only did that because I said to myself, why am I not? I asked myself that question. Why am I not doing it? And one of the answers for me personally is that in some ways I am so close to my family and specifically my brothers that it's like I didn't necessarily want to date someone who reminded me of that particular relationship. And I've heard that from other people and other clients who've shared something very similar. And at the same time, I had to admit that there were um, cultural tropes or stereotypes that I was butting up against, um, even as I was being approached by people, or even as I considered off and on through the years, maybe dating someone of a similar race, because background I'm very much about that, but but yeah, I had to really come, have a come to Jesus moment with myself and say, like, what are you doing? Why are you're telling yourself this particular story, but is there something else behind it? And at the same time, to give myself that opportunity to, um, for me to say, to course correct. I don't want to assume that for anyone else it's a course correction for you, but I wanted to be more diverse, even in my own choices. And again, as I do this work, and as I'm being messy here by sharing some of these things with you, that I'm always looking to figure out, like, how can I be more honest with myself? How can I be more, authentic? Um, how can I, continue to uh, excavate any of those places where I'm holding tightly to fears or to shame? That as I say that, when I say fears, again, to be honest, the other thing about um, dating someone a man who was also black, there was fears, and not fears in relationship to him, but fears about his relationship to the world. The idea of loving someone who could be in danger in very real ways. in this world was and maybe continues to be very scary to me. Um, and really, to be honest with you, it I wasn't going to go there, but you know, I would hear I would hear some of the fears. I would hear some of the times that my brothers would come back home and my mom was consoling them because of things that happened in the world. And I did not want that experience. It scared me then, just listening. Um, and it scares me now. And and so in some ways I think I purposely would choose people who, because of how they looked, that there was a certain level of safety for them that I could potentially, even though this might be false, potentially rely on as they moved about the world. Um, I think it goes back to last week's episode around anxiety, right? As I was sharing that, like, I would create these particular containers for myself, and maybe that was one of them. It's like, oh, choosing a partner that could move around about the world with a certain level of assumed safety so that I wouldn't be anxious about losing them. So that's something I had um to work on, right? And there's something that I had to ask myself. And so I'm asking you this question because, again, these are some of the questions I asked myself and that I've had to wrestle with. And some of the ones I didn't ask myself within my partnership, and that got me into some muddled messes, right? Being with someone who had a different type of diversity, that I sometimes bristled with, and sometimes he bristled with me. And, as I'm dating in partnerships, same thing, right? So that's number 3. Um, and then number 4, jumping off of that, is to know that, as you're choosing diversity within partnership, you're also choosing something new. And, again, what I mean by that, and I already spoke a little bit about that, right, is that you're choosing someone who's going to reflect something very different to you than if you chose someone who was maybe coming from a background that was way more similar. I mean, for a lot of us, like, right, we grew up with that. And so we already know what that reflection might look like and feel like. Excuse me. And so, in choosing someone who's very different, right? Like, we get that new type of witnessing, that new type of, at least kind of early, curiosity. And and what I'm saying about choosing diversity and creating something new, it goes back to this blending of what the us, right? There is the you, there's the me, but then who are we? Who the us, right? That even if we decide where are we living, what type of home are we living in, how are we raising the children, under what particular ideas or religion or foundation, culturally, do we have a particular leaning one direction or another in terms of how we decorate our home, or the kind of how we deal with our finances? What are we keeping, right? And what are we compromising on? And in some ways, what are we letting go as we create a new set of rituals, a new set of values that are a blend of our choosing? I mean, all of this too is that you can have a lot of fun in creating something new and different that honors both of you. that honors the love that you're creating with each other. But know that it's not going to look like your family, not in its totality. It's like you can't choose someone and then run them. You start over. You can't choose someone and then run them over with your own culture and say, this is going to be the dominant thing now in our life. Again, why choose someone so different from you to then erase them? That, even as I say that, that sounds horrible. Nobody wants to be erased, right? We are coming into proximity. We are coming into relationship with each other to be witnessed, to be seen, to be loved, not to be erased. And so if I'm choosing diversity, therefore I'm choosing to build something new with someone where I'm honoring your background, my background, and then maybe we're creating our own, right? New something, rituals, ideas. I'm doing that within partnership, and I'm doing that from a place of wanting to elevate our experience and our love for each other. Not to bulldoze you. And don't do it in order to disappear. Again, back to why am I choosing someone who's so different from me? Don't do that so that you disappear, because you're not going to like it, right? Maybe you can disappear for a couple months or a couple of years, even a decade, but then you're not going to like it, because all of, right, the you-ness of your background, your culture, your values, they're going to start bubbling up, right? And go back to the stress and anxiety. It's like, that's where we start to get sick, when we start to close ourselves off from who we are, when we start to clamp down on how we define ourselves and who we truly are, when we kind of close our throat, or we close our hearts, or we close ourselves off, or we cut ourselves off from our family, we cut ourselves off from our background. And like, I'm a new person. I've invented myself out of nothing. Again, it works for a little bit. It works for a little bit, but your background's always, maybe this is a warning, your background's always going to find you. It's always going to find you. And I think that's a gift, that our spirit, our soul is never giving up on us. It's like, all right, you can cut us off and close the door and pretend to be something else, or you can merge yourself so deeply into another person's life or culture or experience that you disappear, but your essence is always there. It's always going to be tapping you on the shoulder. And I think that's beautiful. It may suck for a little while, but for us to be truly, truly, deeply loved, we have to allow ourselves to be truly, deeply loved by ourselves, and to be acknowledged and appreciated by ourselves, to ourselves, so that we can be loved and appreciated by those around us. And so asking why I'm with someone, and knowing that I'm choosing diversity, and as I said, don't do it so that you are, erasing someone or basically oppressing someone, right? We all know what happens there. doesn't that doesn't end well, right, for anybody. And some of the problems that we're in this world, that what is being asked of us is the opportunity to celebrate, and the opportunity to be accepted in our fullness, right? From that place of deep curiosity, from that place of of diversity. Therefore, I can see and feel my edges in relationship to you. And now I can be witnessed within those edges. And now I'm asking and requiring you to celebrate those differences and to accept them. Again, I think as I shared before, it's like where we can get in trouble, is that we can appreciate the beauty of a culture. We can appreciate um, someone's skin color or someone's uh, hair or style. We can appreciate someone's cuisine or someone's, I know I talk about spirituality and religion here, but I think because it can be it's so easily defined in some ways, we all have a sense of it. So I think that's why I use that often. But so my example, again, using myself, it's like, oh, someone can love my warmth, they love my loyalty, or they love, how I love, but then they, don't love the fact that I'm religious. And it's like, well, where do you think that all came from? Right? And so we can say that about any culture in some ways, right? It's like, oh, I love like visiting your culture, but then I get upset about being bombarded by like the iceberg, the foundation that makes that culture alive for you. It's like, oh, I love the fact that I love your blackness, but I don't want all the things that come. That makes no sense, right? The things that are beautiful and glorious and amazing. But I don't want to talk about the fact that, like, well, because you're black, you're also dealing with oppression, or because you're dealing with racism. Oh, well, I love that you're a woman, but I don't want to deal with the fact that, like, there's struggles that come with being a woman. What? You want my beauty, my softness, my femininity, but then you're like, no, I don't want to interface with, your fears or your ideas around safety or your ideas around being heard. I don't want to do, like, just give me the femininity and the softness, please. You suck. No, right? And again, we can broaden that, in all kinds of ways, throughout all kinds of cultures, throughout all types of diversity. So the celebration, the acceptance is accepting the whole iceberg, right? If I'm attracted to you as a person who is different or diverse from me, I have to assume that there's a whole iceberg that is supporting the diversity that I'm attracted to. And that I'm required to be curious about that. I'm required to know that. I'm required to witness that. And so going back to, some of these relationships that, when it's, again, the clear diversity of, like, maybe someone who is white and grew up here in the US versus someone who is a person of color, these contrasting diverse experiences in a lot of ways. It's like you two are required to try and understand each other's individualized experiences in the world, and to hopefully offer compassion and empathy and connection around that. And so choosing someone who's so different from you did that on purpose. And so then part of your job in loving that person is understanding why. right? And not punishing them or you for that choice. And then lastly, this is going a little long, so I will I'll try and hurry up. But lastly, number 5 is to, when we're thinking about children, is to let your children represent what you love about each other. And then also to know, and I'm reading from my notes, to know that your children's experience will be different from your own, and that it should be talked about. That again, my children are very multicultural, as I've shared, and my children are also fairly kind of like white passing on some level. I talk to my children about that. I think it's really important for them to understand, or to at least, again, be curious about the idea of how they are specifically identifying as Black and Mexican. But also, there's going to be a ton of people who absolutely do not assume that about them. And so there is a level of privilege that they have, even a level of safety that they have in the world, that they are going to be privileged to be in particular circles with people, that they might be privileged to hear particular conversations that they wouldn't have access to if someone knew that they were Black, or if someone knew that they were Mexican. And we have those conversations. We have the conversations around what it looks like when they are someplace and one of their parents shows up. And it's like, oh, right. Or that moment that they identify themselves as mixed race or as Black, and Latina, Mexican. Those are conversations that need to be had. And again, talking about potentially the stereotypes that come up from that, the cultural conversations around that, around what does it mean to be identified in these ways and to hold these particular identities like within the world. What does it mean? As I'm teaching my children, what does it mean for them to show up as Black? What does it mean for them to hold that identity, to be proud about that identity, but for that identity to also be invisible to a lot of people? And what does that mean, I think, for me to even ask them to hold that identity, right, within the world? Again, there I have several clients who are coming from multiracial backgrounds. It is a new experience. It is a very different experience if you are the parents of someone who is a mixed race child and you are not yourself multicultural mixed race. I really challenge you to continue to again stay curious and to do your research and to speak to them about that experience. It is not easy to be toggling between different cultures. There's a lot of things that they may be confronted with that you are not being confronted with. And giving them permission to have these conversations with you is really important. Even not just giving them permission, but saying that this is a conversation that we should be having or that we want to have before you may be confronted with some of these situations. My children have been told on a couple of occasions that maybe that they're not Black, or that, well, I don't see you as Black and therefore what? Right? And what does it mean for them, again, to look a particular way, but to be raised by a Black mother or a mixed race Mexican and white father? These are all important conversations and things to consider as you're creating a diverse partnership. But you're just loving your children doesn't cover them from how the world wants to interact with them. And this isn't about like putting fear in them, or it's actually about how do we celebrate the fact that our love created something beautiful, different, new, diverse, and something that we can all now be curious about and celebrate and love. And what would it mean for us to just, again, witness our children in the same way that we want to be witnessed, and to appreciate the fact that our love just created something uh, different and new. And so therefore our children are going to have a different and new experience that's separate from us. And to just give space for that, and for them to be seen in that way. All right, so I'm going to end it there. I hope this was helpful. Um, yeah, let's keep talking. All right, I will say goodbye. Thank you again. Comment, share, ask questions if you'd like. Drop me a message. All right, bye. Thank you so much for listening. As always, please share, comment, and like so we can grow our community and bring more love to those you love. Great reviews mean a great deal to our work, so take a few minutes and write us a love letter today. Our hearts appreciate every word. Tune in next week for another episode.